Kurt Busch is getting closer to making a full recovery and hopes to return to NASCAR soon. Kyle Busch says that Joe Gibbs was putting up personal money for him to return back in 2022, and Junior Motorsports is still interested in making a jump up to the Cup Series. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to your video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about Xfinity, as it was announced on Friday that Xfinity has signed on as a sponsor with 23XI Racing. They'll be associate sponsor, I believe, for the whole entire season, and they will sponsor Tyler Reddick at Atlanta Motor Speedway, I believe, in July. They will have a sponsor 45 car with Xfinity. Really great to see Xfinity expanding their partnership with 23XI Racing. To be honest, I think it'd be cool if they did decide to finally go to Xfinity Series, but in general, I think it's really good to see that Xfinity is jumping on a sponsor with 23XI Racing. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Wendy's. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon that Wendy's is going to sponsor Legacy Motor Club in multiple races in 2023. So this is not the only time we are going to see them sponsor Noah Gragson this year. I have to imagine Erik Jones potentially could get a primary sponsorship at some point. But really good to see that Wendy's is going to continue sponsoring Legacy Motor Club for multiple races this year. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the U.S. Air Force. As is first reported by Kelly Crandall, that the U.S. Air Force is going to be sponsoring Erik Jones for 3 races in 2023. They're going to sponsor him at Talladega in the spring, then Charlotte for the Coke 600, and then Bristol in the fall. This paint scheme looks absolutely incredible. In my opinion, my favorite U.S. Air Force scheme I've seen in quite a bit of time. I think it looks really awesome. Looks really good. I'm looking forward to seeing the car on the racetrack in multiple races this season. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Sling. Now, Sling put out a tweet on Saturday afternoon that caught a lot of attention from a lot of people, and what they were doing was they were showing support to Kyle Busch. Now, this is not the first time as Sling has shown support to Kyle Busch. They showed support earlier in this offseason, so maybe we could see Sling be a new potential sponsor for Kyle Busch this season. They had Rowdy Energy cans, and honestly, I would not be shocked or surprised in the near future if we see Sling decide to sponsor Kyle Busch. But really good to see Sling sponsor, basically showing support for Kyle Busch, and maybe we'll see them as a sponsor in the future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Lego. As Adam Stern reported on Friday afternoon and Saturday afternoon, that Lego is a new licensee of NASCAR this year and will start selling a Lego version of the Gen 7 on March 1st as part of its Technic Advanced Models line. This is really awesome to see that Lego is getting involved in NASCAR. It's been really great to see a lot of companies coming in and sponsoring, especially as of recently. Having Lego be part of a sport, I think is absolutely huge. And to see that they are going to be doing this sponsorship and being part of it and basically, doing this Technic line, I think in general is really awesome for the sport in general. And I think it's really great to see that they are going to have a Technic line and they're going to have a car, which I think is really great to see, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Discount Tire. As it was announced Sunday morning before the Daytona 500 that Discount Tire has signed an extension with Team Penske. They are going to be sponsoring Ryan Blaney, Austin Cindric throughout the 2023 season, and they're also going to be continuing to work with the IndyCar team. Discount Tire has been working with Team Penske since 2010 season. They started working with them back in 2010, sponsoring Brad Keselowski for his whole entire season with the Team Penske brand and the Team Penske group. In general, I think it's really amazing to see that Discount Tire is doing this. Really awesome for sure, and great to see that Discount Tire will continue working with the team for the next few years. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dierks Bentley. As during his pre-race concert for the Daytona 500, it was also announced on the Fox coverage during pre-race that Dierks Bentley is going to be performing the pre-race concert at North Wilkesboro. Really good to see, and it makes a lot of sense, at least for North Wilkesboro. Personally, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense for the Daytona 500 as much anymore, but I think it makes a lot of sense, especially for where they're going, that he will be part of that pre-race coverage. In general, I'm glad to see that he'll be at least performing the pre-race coverage there. I think that's a really good move that they've done, and good to see that he will perform the pre-race concert. I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, but it's good to see at least for that one, he will perform there. I think it makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about JTG Doherty Racing. Now, last night, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. went on to win the Daytona 500, picking up his third career NASCAR Cup Series victory and his first win in 199 starts that goes back to July of 2017, of course, at the Daytona National Speedway on the July 4th weekend. This was also the first win for a single-car team since 2011, which, of course, was won by Trevor Bayne, win the number 21 for the Woodbirds, which, of course, was their 98th win as an organization. It also needs to be noted that Brad Daugherty is the first African-American owner to win the Daytona 500. So Brad Daugherty does have some big bragging rights over Michael Jordan now that he has won a Daytona 500, and they both, of course, played in the NBA. And now Brad Daugherty has those bragging rights. Massive congratulations to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. on winning the Daytona 500. I think it's really exciting stuff, and major congratulations to JTG Doherty Racing on getting a Daytona 500 win. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about attendance for the Daytona 500. Now, Dustin Albino and multiple other reporters have put out tweets about the attendance for Daytona 500. First, let's talk about the Truck Series. Basically was announced that the Truck Series had their biggest crowd in 12 years since 2011. For the Xfinity Series, they had their best crowd since the $300 million renovations for Daytona Rising back in 2016. And for Daytona 500, for the 8th year in a row, it sold out. And apparently, according to reports, there were 150,000 people that were at Daytona International Speedway, which I think is absolutely incredible and amazing to see that many people showed up for the Daytona 500, the biggest race of the year. I think it's really amazing to see, incredible, and fantastic that so many people show up to 500. It's growing every year now. NASCAR is growing, and in general, I think it's big for the sport. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to go ahead and talk about celebs at the Daytona 500. Now, there were quite a few celebrities that were at the Daytona 500. Among those were Pete Davidson, Tiffany Haddish, Derek Jeter, Blippi, and also Mr. Beast was at the Daytona 500 as well. Shout out to Super Squad for bringing this up on social media, on Twitter. But Mr. Beast is also at the Daytona 500. Maybe he's filmed a video at Daytona National Speedway, which, of course, he did film a video at Bristol Motor Speedway for a hide-and-seek video. The fact that you have all those celebs showing up to the Daytona 500 in general, I think is really, really big and really massive for the sport, and great to see that all those celebrities show up for Daytona 500. I think is big in general for the sport, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the truck race at Daytona. As was noted by Joseph Strigley, that for the truck race at Daytona, there were 41 caution laps and 38 green flag laps run. This is the first time in Truck Series history where there were more caution laps than green flag laps in the race. The truck race, in my opinion, was very, very disjointed, to be honest with you. It was just very disjointed. It was not together really well at all. And it was very frustrating to watch as a fan because, in all honesty, in all seriousness, you don't want those broadcasts to be, well, the race in general to be disjointed. And I thought it was kind of disjointed with all those cautions and stuff. That being said, though, it is what it is. And it was the most, basically, first time it's ever happened in history. But it's not shocking and not surprising, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Ford. As was reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon, that Marsh Rochberg said to the media that Ford's F1 plans will not affect their NASCAR partnership, as he also noted that they will still be basically working with NASCAR and all their other partners they're currently involved with at the moment, and it will still basically overlapping it, but they're not going to be getting out of NASCAR. In fact, I remember talking about this on the channel earlier, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that Ford is in talks and discussion, baby, expand their programs in the near future. It's really good to see. Chevy also not planning to change anything as well. They're planning to stay in NASCAR. They're not planning to get out of it, which I think in general is really good to see that Ford is still going to be involved in NASCAR and they're not planning to change it despite the fact of these rumblings and rumors. That being said, though, I'm happy to see that Ford will not be changing their plans going forward. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Garage 56 entry. As on Friday afternoon and Friday early afternoon, the Garage 56 car was officially unveiled. I really love this Garage 56 entry. It looks really awesome, looks really, really good, and I think in general it will look really good on the racetrack when it does officially run in the Le Mans 24 hours. Now, of course, it does have to get approved by the ACO. I would have to imagine that it's likely going to get approved by the ACO, but like I've said, it does have to get approved before they can go ahead and run it. That being said, though, I think it looks really awesome, looks really, really great, and I'm looking forward to see that we'll be on the racetrack in Lamont. I think it's big for the sport in general. You have a thing like this happening, and I'm glad to see that the Garage 56 entry is going to be running on the racetrack. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about next-gen changes. As reported by Bob Packrass on Friday morning, that pending wind tunnel test next week, they expect NASCAR to use a 2-inch spoiler and remove engine strakes and some diffuser extension panels for most short tracks and road courses. The only changes that they are not going to be making, the only tracks that will not be involved in those changes, are Bristol and Dover. Now, I think a big reason is because of the load on the tires is one of the biggest reasons why they're not going to be changing it there, which honestly, I wish they would have changed it for Bristol and Dover, but I'm not completely shocked or surprised they're not changing it for Bristol or Dover. It makes a lot of sense that they're not going to be doing it at those tracks. But, of course, they did a short track test. I'm really glad that this is happening because the short track and road course racing in general, and in my opinion, was not very good this past year, and last year, I should say, and it definitely needs to be improved going into 2023. I do hope with whatever changes they made and the changes that they decided to make, I hope it makes the racing a lot better. Now, I wish they were changing it for Bristol because Bristol's race last year wasn't really that great. I did say the race was good. I didn't think it was great. Dover was a good race in my opinion, so not surprised they're not changing it there because I thought the race there was actually pretty good. That being said, though, I'm not shocked or surprised that those changes are not coming, and I'm not surprised, but I'm glad to see at least they are making some changes for the event, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael Jordan. Now, Steve Lauletta was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio on Friday afternoon during the big media zone thing that they were doing in the fan zone. And Steve Lauletta says that Michael is really involved in 23XI racing. It's really good to see that Michael Jordan is really involved with 23XI racing. That's what Steve Lauletta said. He wouldn't have come to NASCAR if he was not going to be involved in the team. It's really good to see that Michael Jordan is really getting involved in the organization. I think it sounds like it's getting more involved now than he had been, which in general, I think 23XI Racing's performance has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. And I really think in 2023, you're going to see some really big upticks into performance. But the fact they've got Michael Jordan getting involved in that, I think is really great to see. And I'm very happy to see that Michael Jordan, in general, is getting involved with it. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Alex Labbe. As Alex Labbe basically announced on Facebook and basically reported to some multiple reporters that he will drive the 28 for RSS Racing at Auto Club Speedway. This will be the first time Alex Labbe has not competed for DJM Racing, which of course is a Canadian team owned by Mario Gosselin. This is the first time that he will be outside of that organization running at Auto Club with RSS Racing. But this is a pretty solid ride in my opinion, and I think that you're going to see Alex Labbe run really, really well with the RSS Racing Group. I think he's a very talented driver who's really never gotten a chance at a top-tier car. This isn't a top-tier car by any stretch of imagination, but it's definitely a better car than the one he's had with DJM Racing in the past. But I'm happy to see, nonetheless, that he's getting the opportunity to run more races, and I'm glad to see he'll be running for RSS Racing. I think he'll get the best out of that equipment, and I'm very happy to see that he will be going ahead and running some more races with that team and getting an opportunity to run with that team in 2023, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jesse Iwuji Motorsports. As it was reported on Friday afternoon that Jesse Iwuji Motorsports is not going to be running the full season in 2023. As the team is expected to miss the West Coast swing and not run at Auto Club, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. Their next race they plan to, at this current time, is at Atlanta, and they plan to have Kyle Weatherman behind the wheel of the car. It's really unfortunate Jesse Iwuji Motorsports is not running the full season. I think the fact that Equity Prime Mortgage, which of course Jesse Iwuji Motorsports has not basically had a lawsuit very recently with that team, I'm not completely shocked or surprised they're not running the full season because you've got to have full season sponsorship funding if you're going to run the whole entire season. But I'm not shocked or surprised by that in any shape or form that they're not running the full season with that fact coming out very, very recently. That being said, though, it's disappointing news, but I'm not completely shocked or completely surprised in any shape or form that they're not running the full season. I hope they run some more races, but I'm not surprised or shocked that they're not going to be running the full season. To be perfectly honest with you, not shocked or surprised by that. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about NBM Motorsports. Now, there's been a lot of talk about NBM Motorsports on social media because there's been a couple articles that came out saying that NBM Motorsports is not planning to run any cup races in 2023. Well, NBM Motorsports basically revealed on social media, I believe on yesterday, that they have cup cars actually prepared, and if they get sponsorship or funding, they might end up running some NASCAR races this year, but they're going to need sponsorship funding if they're going to go ahead and run. Now, there's a lot of talk that they only will have one Xfinity Series team in 2023, maybe through it full-time this year, though this sounds like right now they do have a couple of cars that did run at Daytona. I think both of them failed to qualify, if I'm not mistaken, which is definitely unfortunate for the Xfinity Series race. They had a rough weekend for sure. But overall, in my opinion, I hope they get sponsorship money so they can run more races in Cup because I miss seeing NBM Motorsports. I wish they were at the Daytona 500 this year, but they were not at Daytona, which is really, really unfortunate, and it kind of sucked, to be honest with you. But I hope they do get the sponsorship money so they can run more races this year because I think it would be really good for the sport in general, and I really hope they can get the sponsorship funding so they can go ahead and run some more races in the future because I miss seeing them on the racetrack, and hopefully they can run some more Cup races in the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, obviously, we've already talked about this, but Ricky Stenhouse Jr. won the Daytona 500 this year. And he actually revealed to the media, and Daniel McFadden reported on this, but basically that he had a contract with Roush Fenway at the time, which was Roush Fenway Racing at the time. He had a contract with RFK Racing through the 2023 season initially. Now, of course, in 2019, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., on the week after Richmond, he was basically fired from that team, and they announced that Chris Buescher was going to be going into that 17 car starting in 2020. And basically was a driver swap where Ricky Stenhouse Jr. went over to the 47 car. Well, at the time, Ryan Preece in the 47, then they switched him out to the 37 car, and they put Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in the 47 car. Now, let's be honest and for real, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. really has never gotten a fair shake, in my opinion. I know a lot of people don't think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is a really talented driver, which I think he is. I mean, he's a two-time Xfinity Series champion. He's won multiple races now. Granted, they are super speed races, but I think Stenhouse is a talented driver that really has not completely gotten his fair shake in the spotlight, and it's good to see that he was able to get that win to get his fair shake in the spotlight. That being said, though, in general, I think it's really unfortunate he didn't get to go through 2023. The sport would have been a much different position, but also Chris Buescher would never gotten the opportunity to be in a very competitive car had that not happened. So I think it's a two-way street, unfortunately, and at the time when it happened, he got fired because of what happened at Richmond and got moved over to the team, but initially had his contract with that team through 2023, and how much different the sport would have been in 2023 had that happened, I think it would have been a lot different, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to go ahead and talk about Greg Van Alst. Now, on Saturday afternoon, I did not make a YouTube video on this, but on Saturday afternoon was the ARCA race at Daytona International Speedway. We got a couple stories around that. But the biggest story of the day, outside of the other one we're going to talk about, is Greg Van Alst winning at Daytona. Greg Van Alst had a really strong car at Daytona, ran in the top 5 pretty much all day long. He had Jim Long as a crew chief, which is very interesting. But Greg Van Alst won the ARCA race at Daytona, his first career ARCA win. And his interview, in my opinion, was absolutely incredible. It got me emotional hearing that interview and just hearing how excited he was, his emotion after winning it, how big it was for him. He's been in the short track scene for many, many years, grinding, gave up career to go do some work in Windows, if I'm not mistaken. And now he's a winner at Daytona in ARCA, which is huge for the sport. His emotion came off. He said that this is for the short track racers who don't believe they can do it. He's a proof in the pudding that if you put the work into it, you can make it to that level. And to see him go out there and win, I thought was phenomenal. And I thought that was absolutely incredible to see him go out there and win. It's amazing to see. Really awesome for him, and I think it was big in sport in general to see Greg Van Alst win. Massive congratulations to him, and a well-deserved win for Greg Van Alst. He absolutely deserved the win, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Muniz. We already talked a little bit about the ARCA race, but a big story also around the ARCA race was Frankie Muniz, who ended up having a pretty strong run and ended up finishing in 11th at Daytona and actually restarted 24th because he was involved in a wreck not that far back. Basically got involved in a wreck with Andy Jankowiak and Aaron Balakane. Basically got involved in that wreck and unfortunately got quite a bit of damage, but he rebounded on 2 laps ago from 24th to 11th place. Frankie Muniz, who doesn't have a lot of experience, who does have some racing experience, but doesn't have a lot of experience racing stock cars, he finished 11th and had a really respectful race and was pretty competitive too. He ran top 10 a lot of the day. I think that damage did affect him a little bit. Unfortunately, never got back up to the front. But to finish 11th is impressive, and he could have won the race. That 30 car from Retta Jones Racing, they made a pretty fast car for him. And in general, he ran a very respectful and good race until the end, but still had a great finish and finished in his debut 11th. And that's really impressive. He's, of course, going to run the full season this year, which I'm really excited for. I cannot wait to see what he's going to do. I think he's going to do a really good job with this team, to be perfectly honest with you. That being said, though, I'm very happy for him, and I think he had a very, very strong performance, had a really, really great run. So happy to see him have a really, really fantastic performance, and glad to see that he will get to run the full season because he did a very awesome, and in my opinion, a really, really good job, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Joey Logano. Now, Jeff Gluck always does these 12 questions or 10 question things on the athletic page. And Joey Logano actually revealed to him something very interesting that I did not know, that Joey Logano actually could have signed with Chip Ganassi Racing. He was very close, and this was the close team he could sign with outside of Joe Gibbs Racing. And the reason he said that is because he revealed that there were multiple teams that were interested in Joey Logano. RFK Racing, which made a lot of sense, considering the fact that Mark Martin was a really big reason why Joey Logano really got the opportunity he had. Mark Martin really took him kind of under his wing and gave Joey Logano an opportunity. Chip Ganassi came very close to signing him at a young age. I think it was around 15 or 16 years old. They were going to sign Joey Logano. But Joey Logano was like, hold up, wait a minute. They were already getting the paper out and stuff, and the pen out and stuff. And it's just very interesting that they almost signed with that team because, in my opinion, how much more different would the sport be right now if Joey Logano would have signed with Chip Ganassi Racing? Because that team really was not that good when Logano was going to sign him. It's going to be honest. Now, Logano probably would have gotten the best out of that equipment, but I don't know if Ganassi would have been at the level they were at if Logano had signed with Ganassi. But the sport is much different. Started with Joe Gibbs Racing, but imagine how much different the sport would be right now if he actually would have signed. I think it would have been a lot different, to be honest with you, and we would have been talking about a much different story, and I don't know if Joey Logano would have won multiple championships had he signed with Chip Ganassi Racing. It's just crazy that it almost happened, and Chip Ganassi probably would have still been around had Logano signed with the team. That being said, though, I think the sport turned out in a really good position, and it's good to see that he sticked around and decided to go to the team he wanted to, because I think, let's be honest, I think Joe Gibbs at the time, he wanted to go there, and I'm glad he got to go to the team that he really wanted to go to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Petty. Now, Richard Petty was, of course, speaking to media this past week, talking, of course, about Jimmie Johnson becoming a part owner of the team. And basically, Richard Petty believes that Jimmie Johnson will be the majority owner of Legacy Motor Club in 4 to 5 years. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think he will be as well in the next 4 to 5 years. I think that you're going to see Richard Petty with him not being as much involved in the team. I think Jimmie Johnson's ownership stake in Legacy Motor Club, I think, is going to continue to grow over the next few years. And the fact he's already have input, and they've already getting a lot of sponsorship from companies like Wendy's and of course, Guns N' Roses, I think, and Carvana as well. I think a big reason why they've gotten all the sponsors and stuff and all the great scenes is because of Jimmie Johnson. I think he's playing a major role in helping that out a lot. But also, a part of this story that kind of came out and got a lot of media attention was what Richard Petty says. He says with Jimmie taking over, it bothered him a bit, but it alluded to Jimmie thinking a handful of years down the road. And he even admits that kind of like he was really kind of getting out anyways, and he needed to make a big change to really make the team a lot successful. This got a lot of talk from the media, and a lot of people were talking about this. There were articles coming out about this and stuff. Look, let's be honest about Richard Petty. Do you think that Guns N' Roses sponsorship happens with Richard Petty? I don't think so. Do you think that Wendy's sponsorship really happens? I don't think so. I think Jimmie Johnson coming into this team is going to make the team a lot more successful. And I think with Maury Gallagher and Mike Dean coming into play, and a big thing that needs to be known is that Richard kind of really stole his stake from the team and basically became the figurehead. And, you know, it's not a surprise and a shock that Richard said these comments. But again, I think that Richard also is alluding that, in a sense, that Jimmie really is playing a role in making about the future of the team. And I think that this team is going to be more successful with Jimmie running it and helping with the team. And I think long-term, like Richard said, I think that he will become the majority owner of the organization in the foreseeable future. And to be honest with you, I think it's good that I understand Richard being a little frustrated, but same token and same time, I think that in some essence, I don't completely agree with him, but same token, same time, I understand Richard's comments in a pretty big way, because I can understand Richard being frustrated about it, but at the same token, same time, he doesn't completely have a right to be frustrated about it, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Jeffrey Earnhardt versus Parker Kligerman. Now, we had basically short track tempers on a super speedway track. Near the end of the race, and Parker Kligerman was involved in multiple incidents in the race. First, Parker Kligerman got involved in turning Sheldon Creed. Just a bad bump from Parker Kligerman. Just really sometimes you have those bad bumps. You're going to have that happen sometimes. He unfortunately got in the back of Sheldon Creed, causing a multiple car incident. But Sheldon Creed did not confront him about that. On the other hand, Jeffrey Earnhardt actually confronted Parker Kligerman about the wreck. In Jeffrey's interview, he was not very happy after the contact. So with 11 laps to go, Parker Kligerman was trying to make a move happen. And he basically tried to come up in front of Jeffrey Earnhardt and made a really, really bad move, a rookie mistake from Parker Kligerman that he should have known better about, and got Jeffrey into the outside wall. And Jeffrey, unfortunately, got taken out of contention, unfortunately, because of that really bad move and that really, really bad mistake by Parker Kligerman. And after that happened, Jeffrey confronted him. He had some very interesting things to say. He basically said that was a rookie move. He basically said it's in the media that he would have been in the infield care center. Again, if he wasn't in the infield care center, he would have confronted him and probably put him back in the infield care center. But then after that, they had a conversation, had an argument, basically, and they were basically going at each other. Look, going back over to the incident, Jeffrey Earnhardt has every right to be upset and pissed. That was a stupid move by Parker. And Parker knows better than that. And I have a lot of respect for Parker Kligerman. I think Parker's a very talented driver and has proven himself. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. Parker Kligerman should have known better to not make the move that he made. And he still made the move anyways and was just way too aggressive and way in over his head in that situation. In my opinion, I think Parker's completely at fault for the situation and should have known better. That was a bad move on his part, and I think he did a terrible job doing that. And he didn't completely take full responsibility, which I expect better from Parker Kligerman, because he's a better driver than that, and he's a more talented driver than that, and he should have completely done a much better job than that. That being said, though, it is what it is, and it's just an unfortunate situation, but Jeffrey Earnhardt, in my opinion, has a complete right to be upset about it. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Travis Pastrana. As Travis Pastrana was speaking to Bob Pockrass and Motorsports after Daytona 500, he put up a really spectacular performance, finishing 11th, and he says he does not plan to do another Cup race once again. Look, Travis Pastrana got to do one of his lifelong dreams, was race in the Daytona 500. And Travis Pastrana, all things considered, he did a really respectful and a really good job in the Daytona 500. He had a great race. Well, of course, he did get a speeding penalty for exiting too many pit boxes, but was up front near the end and finished 11th. Granted, a lot of people are going to blame him for causing the incident, which I'll be honest with you guys, I don't think Travis Pastrana was at fault. I think Eric Almirola, more than anything, was at fault for getting into the back of Travis Pastrana, in my opinion. I think that was more on Eric Almirola than Travis Pastrana, because Travis got turned by Eric Almirola. But Travis got to live his lifelong dream, and he was pretty respectful in the duels at times. Yes, he got involved in a wreck with Austin Hill that kind of took Austin Hill out of contention, though that was really caused by Daniel Suarez more than anything else. But in all seriousness, in all honesty, it's going to suck to not see Travis come back, but I'm not surprised or shocked that Travis is not going to be coming back in the foreseeable future and anytime soon. Maybe in the future he changes his mind and does decide to come back, but I think as of now, you're not going to see Travis trying to come back in the near or the foreseeable future race, but I'm not surprised he's not planning as of now to do another Cup race. I would love to see him back and do another Cup race, but I'm not surprised or shocked that he's not planning to do another Cup race in the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, Jimmie Johnson was speaking to the media on Friday, and he basically told the media that he will never run a full NASCAR Cup Series season again. I'm not shocked or surprised he's not going to run a full season again. He's going to run quite a few races, though, this year. Jimmie Johnson, as of now, from what we understand, he's going to run maybe around 9 to 10 races this year. He's already announced 2 of the races that he is going to run in the Cup Series. He's going to run, he, of course, ran the Daytona 500, where he unfortunately finished, I believe, 31st or 32nd, which, let's be for real, he could have finished in the top 10 without that Daniel Suarez caution, but I digress there. Unfortunately, Suarez kind of came down to Jimmie Johnson in that situation, but I digress. Jimmie also is going to run the Chicago Street Course later this year, and also is going to be running with the Garage 56 entry in Le Mans. I'm not surprised or shocked that Jimmie does not, as of now, plan to run any more full-time seasons. It would have been really cool if he did because, let's be honest, he looked really competitive out there in the 500. And maybe that's just the thing, that fact that they were really good for the Daytona 500. But he ran a really respectful, in my opinion, a great race. Got involved in an incident, but he still continued on. If that second incident doesn't happen, he survives, he will be up front contending for a win in the Daytona 500. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to see Jimmie Johnson be extremely competitive this year. And I would love for him to be competitive because I think Jimmie can be competitive this year. If Legacy Motor Club brings the cars they got last year, boy, oh boy, we're in for a treat as Jimmie Johnson fans. And to see Jimmie be as competitive as he truly was in the Daytona 500, made me happy as a Jimmie Johnson fan. And I think in general, it is exciting to see that Jimmie ran as well as he generally did. And in general, I'm very happy to see that Jimmie's not running a full season anymore because, to be honest, I didn't want to see him run a full season. But at the same token, at the same time, maybe in the future, we're going to see Jimmie Johnson change his mind. But as of now, he does not plan to run a full Cup season in the near future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Fox dashboard and also Fox's coverage in general. Now, Adam Stern reported on this on Sunday. Mike Joy actually commented on this, which I found interesting. But he reports that NASCAR has been working on cameras to make them go unblurred with the dashboards. Let's be for real here. If you watch the dual coverage, the dashboards were horrendous. It was pixelated. It was distracting to watch. And it was very, very frustrating to watch. And they still were very blurred, by the way, during the 500. Despite the fact that they were planning to change that, they didn't really change it at all, and they were still very, very blurred. Now, Mike Joy basically tried to say that, I think in the comments below, he tried to basically say that Adam Stern was misinformed on the situation. But Mike, he was not reporting what you said. He said Fox's decision basically said what Stephen Shun said. Something per Stephen Shun, by the way, that Stephen Shun said that. So you should go talk to Stephen Shun instead of talking to, basically trying to go after Adam, because Adam was not really wrong in the situation. That being said, let's talk about Fox's coverage, because I want to transition to that. Fox's TV coverage was absolutely horrendous. I don't care what anybody says. I've been critical of Fox's coverage. Follow me on social media. You know how critical I was of their coverage. It was a joke. The amount of commercials was ridiculous. There were 23 or 24 commercial breaks in a 210-lap race. Now, this, of course, was the longest Daytona 500 in the history. We did not go even 10 laps straight without a commercial break. Whether it was cautions or green flag racing, we averaged 8 to 9 laps per green flag run. That's unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable. It turned fans off, and it was really frustrating to watch for someone like me who covers the sport on this channel and covers sport in general on all social medias. I was very frustrated about it, and I said coming this year that I wasn't going to be frustrated about it. But when it's like that, you got to be frustrated about it because it's absolutely embarrassing how bad the coverage was. You can't make coverage that bad. How many commercials there were? I will say one thing. Fox's pre-race coverage was 10 out of 10. It was a really good pre-race. You can basically, the only thing you maybe can question is some of the stuff they did at the beginning, but pre-race was really, really good. They went in depth with the stories. They did a great job there. But it wasn't just the fact that there were commercials. They were doing Wendy spots. They were doing the Toyota spot of the race. It's in Busch 401k moment of the race. It was just very difficult to watch and embarrassing to watch as a fan. I could not stand it. It was really bad. I was the only one talking about it, and it was a joke of coverage. People at the race probably had a better time. This is a main median, though, for 99% of people watching the 500, or 98% for that matter, who watch the 500. You're broadcasting to a lot of people. This is the biggest race of the year. This should be the best broadcast of the year, because this is the most watched motorsport race in the world. Well, basically, it's outside of Formula One for all the other countries, but in the United States, this is the biggest race of the year. You've got to make better coverage than that. I hope at Auto Club they make changes. Or in the next TV deal, make it better. Because I thought in general, the broadcast stuff, when you didn't have all the commercials, was pretty good. And the race was good. And it got ruined by the commercials. I'm just going to say that. And it was really bad on Fox's part. And they got to 100% do a better job going forward. Because it was frustrating to watch. It was bad to watch. And it was really, really just difficult to watch. And I can't blame people for turning off the race who did. Because it was hard to watch and very difficult to watch, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Kyle Busch in the Indy 500. Now, obviously, Kyle Busch basically talked about his last year, but he will not run the Indy 500 in 2023. Now, Austin Kinensky from Sports Now put out a really good article around potentially if Trackhouse maybe in the future running the Indy 500, because I talk about it a couple times, but Trackhouse Racing in the past has been interested in running the Indianapolis 500 in the past. And one thing that's been talked about is the fact, in one of the things that was talked about, that Trackhouse could, if they wanted to, they could in the future acquire Kyle Busch to potentially run the Indy 500 in the future. And basically, Justin Marks told Dustin Long from NBC, he says that I wouldn't say anything is currently off the table at the moment. Trackhouse Racing is a team that really wants to make big splashes and things. They've shown interest in going to IMSA, and they wanted to go to IMSA. They've already done some stuff in Trans Am racing and that kind of stuff. They're already shown interest in other things. They've got Pitbull involved. They've got their own media companies and stuff now. And they're also, Trackhouse is involved winning the Cars Tour now. Justin Marks part of the ownership group of the Cars Late Model Tour. But if they were able to acquire Kyle Busch to run the Indy 500, that would be huge for the sport in general in a lot of ways and in many, many ways. Because having someone like Kyle Busch run the Indy 500 for them would be really, really huge. And Kyle Busch wants to run the Indy 500. He has shown interest in wanting to run the Indy 500, and I really hope in the foreseeable future he does go ahead in a long-term future and does that, hey, I do want to run the Indy 500, and I do want to compete in the Indianapolis 500. I hope it does happen in the future. Trackhouse does try to get Kyle Busch to run the Indy 500, because I wish it was this year, because next year, because Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson against each other, Indy 500. Maybe it still does happen. Maybe Kyle Busch does run the Indy 500 if Trackhouse does decide to go through it and they decide to run it. That being said, though, maybe next year we see Kyle Busch run Indy 500. It could happen. Nothing's off the table. Everything's possible. You have to wait and see what happens. But I do hope in the future, maybe in the long-term future, we do decide to go with it, and maybe in the future they decide to have Kyle Busch run the Indy 500, because I think it would be big for the sport in general, and I think it would be really exciting to see if we saw Kyle Busch maybe in the long-term future decide to run the Indy 500 with the Trackhouse Racing Group, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the number 4 car. Now, Bob Pockrass talked about this around the number 4 car and who's going to take the 4 car in 2024. Because remember, at the end of this season, Kevin Harvick is going to be retiring from NASCAR Cup Series competition. He won't be complaining as of now to come back on a part-time basis. And it was announced during the LA Coliseum race 2 weeks ago that he will be joining the Fox Sports booth starting in 2024, joining Mike Joy and Clint Boyer up on the Fox Sports booth. So we've got that out of the way, and we don't have to speculate what Kevin Harvick is going to be doing next year. Now, the biggest question around it is who's going to drive the 4 car. But not only that, the other question is, will Busch return to sponsor the 4 car? Because I think that's going to be a big factor on who gets in that 4 car next year, because the facts are out there. Busch might leave SHR, because one of the big reasons why Busch is at Stewart-Haas Racing currently at the moment right now is because of Kevin Harvick. They would not be there right now if Kevin Harvick was on that team, because they didn't sponsor SHR before Kevin Harvick got to the organization. So the big question is, will Busch stick around? I'm not entirely sure. Personally, I think it would make a lot of sense for Busch to be sponsoring Kyle Busch. I think that would make a lot of sense. Now we talk about who could go to the 4 car. There's a lot of candidates for that 4 car, but they've definitely dwindled with Ross Chastain signing an extension, Daniel Suarez signing extensions, and also Alex Bowman signing extensions. So now you got to kind of go in the camp or in the KHI camp. Drivers who I think could be considered. Zane Smith. Now, Zane Smith, of course, is under contract with Front Row Motorsports, but Ford, he's under contract with them through 2026 from what I heard. So I believe that Zane Smith could be a candidate, and he would be personally my choice to go to that ride if I had to choose. He would be a great choice for that 4 car. Cole Custer. Cole Custer is a name that needs to be watched. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to the 4 car next year. Cole Custer's in Xfinity, and I think a big reason why he's back in Xfinity is trying to prove himself, so maybe in the future he can get back up to the Cup Series to race in the Cup Series, because he for sure wants to get back up and race in the Cup Series. Next one that I would think needs to be mentioned, Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst had a top 10 of the Daytona 500, part of KHI management, and drives for Stewart-Haas Racing. He's going to 100% be a candidate for that 4 car. You watch. I will also throw out there Hailie Deegan. I don't think Hailie Deegan will jump the Cup, but she's got Monster Energy backing. And if they need sponsorship funding, they've got her or Riley Herbst. Hailie Deegan's definitely going to be one to watch in this silly season, because if she runs well enough with ThorSport, I know she didn't have a great race with ThorSport in Daytona, but that really was not her fault. What happened there? But we'll have to see what happens. I think she's one of the lower candidates, but it's possible. Harrison Burns, another one. He's part of Ford. Don't know what his plans are after next year. He's with Wood Brothers this year. We don't know. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Stenhouse is good friends with Tony Stewart. He's a dirt guy. Also great friends and part of KHI management. Got sponsors from Kroger and stuff. I think that's more of a JTG thing than anything else, but that could be a possibility. And then I'll throw Todd Gilliland's name in the conversation too. Todd Gilliland is had some issues at front row. I know it's part of business and stuff, but still, you got to think that that is something that's probably out there as a possibility. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens, who does drive the 4 car in 2024, but it'll be one of the biggest things to watch during this silly season, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Fox Sports booth. As on yesterday during the broadcast for Daytona 500, they revealed the upcoming people that are going to be in the Fox Sports booth. So Tony Stewart is going to be in the Fox Sports booth at Fontana and Atlanta Motor Speedway. And Danica Patrick is returning to cover the race that she did last year at Las Vegas and Phoenix. First, let's talk about Danica Patrick. I'm going to be honest with you guys. The reason they're bringing Danica Patrick on for the broadcast is because of Starlight. Her coverage at Vegas and Phoenix last year was pretty lackluster. She was not that good last year, in my opinion. She was probably one of my least favorite up there in the booth last year. I don't think she did a very, very good job last year, in my honest opinion. So I'm a little disappointed they're bringing her back. And honestly, I wish Kurt Busch was the one that was doing the coverage in the booth. And I really hope to get Kurt Busch to do the coverage this year, because if they don't, that's going to be disappointing, because I thought Kurt Busch would have made a lot more sense for Las Vegas. Disappointing he's not going to be in the booth. I wish it was him over Danica Patrick. But then going back to talk about Tony Stewart. This one I'm very happy with. Tony Stewart has done a really good job in the booth this year. And in my opinion, so far this year, I think he's already done better this year than he did last year. Last year kind of felt a little timid. This year, he seems a lot more in control. He brings a lot of insight to the broadcast, and I think he's done a really good job in the broadcast booth this year. And he's been really a big breath of fresh air, in my opinion. I think he's done a really good job in general, and I am excited to see that we're going to see him in the booth once again, and just have him back in the booth for those 2 races, and especially at Fontana, where he's a guy, he's won it at Fontana, he's won Atlanta before, he knows how to do it, and he understands a lot of things about how broadcasting in general is supposed to work. Like I said, I would love for them to try to bring Kurt Busch, maybe Jimmie Johnson. They had Jimmie in for the Daytona 500, so maybe during the race he doesn't decide to run, he gets to go in the booth. I would love that for sure, but in all seriousness and in all honesty, I hope whatever they decide to do, they can change up the booth in the future. Of course, Kevin Harvick's getting the booth next year, but Tony Stewart and Danica Patrick will be in the Fox Sports booth in 2023 in those upcoming races. To be honest with you, I'm okay with Tony being in the booth. Danica, not as much, but that is just my honest and sincere opinion on that, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Junior Motorsports and potential jumping up to the Cup Series. Now, we've talked about this on the channel a lot of times. I've had probably 10 videos plus of talking about Junior Motorsports potentially jumping up to the Cup Series, because we've talked about this a lot, but Junior Motorsports and Dale Jr. and his sister Kelly have shown a lot of interest, and they do want to actually jump up to the Cup Series. And Ozzy Gadensky from Sportsnet put out an article talking specifically about that. And they provide an update on the Cup plans for the future. And she notes in that and says that the appetite is still strong. But right now, at this particular moment, they're still kind of in the waiting game. And the biggest reason is because of 2 things. Number 1, the charters. There's a lot of talk currently at the moment that there might be an expansion of the charter system. Steve Phelps talked about it with the media this past week during media days, that he's talking, and there's a potential of them expanding the amount of charters that are in there, and also the amount of money that is potentially going to go to the charter teams. But you have to remember, charters cost a lot of money. So will those initial charters be a lot cheaper? That could be a very big possibility right there. And that could be something to definitely watch for when it comes to the amount of money the charters are potentially going to bring. The second thing is, like I said, the TV deal. A lot of people and teams that are coming in, they're waiting on the upcoming TV deal. And a big reason is because the money that they are potentially going to get. Teams are asking for a lot more money for the TV deal. And apparently there's a lot of talk and conversation that teams could get their way, and they might get double of what they've gotten, which means that they can hire better drivers and bring better teams in, like Junior Motorsports, who's really been interested. We've talked about Junior Motorsports wanting to get in for almost 3 years now, the last 2 years, and they've came close. I could see a potential possibility, though, for them to jump up the Cup in 2024, as I predicted earlier this year. I really do believe there's a good chance and a good possibility that we could see Junior Motorsports decide to jump up to the Cup Series. And I think a lot of fans would be very happy about that if Junior Motorsports did decide to jump up to the Cup Series. I think the chances are 50-50 right now, to be honest, less than I would have said at the beginning of the year because of this new update, but we'll have to wait and see. But then going back and talking about it, what drivers could be a possibility? I would have to think Brandon Jones is a big possibility. He brings sponsorship funding from Menards, so that's going to be a big factor potentially helping him out of getting up the Cup with Junior Motorsports. Obviously, you've got Sam Mayer and Josh Berry. Josh Berry's got Bass for Shots funding now, and Junior would probably love to move him up. And then, of course, Justin Allgaier is also a big possibility and a big option that they could decide to go ahead and go with. To be honest with you, in general, whatever they do decide to go with, I really am supportive of this team, and I hope that whatever they do decide to do, they can make the jump. I think there's a chance they can jump up the Cup. I don't think it's 100% that they are going to jump up next year. I would say, like I mentioned, I think it's 50-50 currently at the moment of them jumping up the Cup. Because if they do decide to jump up the Cup, it would be really big for the sport. Having Dale Jr. part of the sport would be really, really big. Being up with teams. He's one of the teams that wants to get a charter. They've seen close time and time again, but as of right now, it sounds like right now that they're still currently waiting on the charter, and it's 100% going to be a big thing to watch going forward in the foreseeable future. It's one thing to watch, and we'll see what happens going forward in the foreseeable future, to be honest with you. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we talked a lot about the Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs saga. We kind of thought we were going to be done talking about the Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs saga. Well, there's more updates to the Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs saga from last year, as during the previous interview with Tom Rinaldi, which you've not seen the interview, I suggest you go check it out if you watch the 500. It was a really strong interview. But Kyle Busch talked about something that was a little bit interesting that might change the narrative around the Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs racing thing. So it sounds like, according to what Kyle says, that Joe was really pushing to try to keep Kyle Busch. And he says that Coach Joe Gibbs was putting up his own personal money. And I was like, no, that just don't feel right on negotiations with Joe Gibbs Racing. This is definitely going to be very interesting to talk about because Joe Gibbs really wanted to keep Kyle Busch around. At least in the beginning, I think that they really were trying. I think this is during the early, I would expect, and I would have to imagine that this is probably during the early part of negotiations, probably in April, probably in March, and probably in May. And they were really close, remember, to finding a sponsor for Kyle Busch, so Kyle Busch could have a sponsor with Oracle. Oracle was a company that was planning to sponsor Kyle Busch, but unfortunately, once that fell through, I think that things a lot changed really, really quickly. And I also would have to imagine a lot of things that played a role was Ty Gibbs being there. Ty Gibbs, of course, who was having a great year in Xfinity, had made some starts in Cup almost at the time. It had a really strong year in Xfinity, won the Xfinity championship. I think at least at the beginning, I think it's very truthful that Joe Gibbs really wanted to keep Kyle Busch and was, like I said, putting up his own personal money. So you can't completely be mad at Joe Gibbs Racing. The fact they were trying to put up their own personal money to keep Kyle Busch around at the time. I would have to imagine a lot of this was during the early part of negotiations. I don't think this was in the latter portion, like I said. I think this is probably in the early part of those negotiations in the beginning. But like I said, if this is true, and Kyle Busch definitely is probably telling the truth because he was part of that negotiation table, he probably helped them a lot. Now, going back and talking about it a little more, I think Kyle Busch now being at Rich Schultz Racing, transition to that, I really do believe that Kyle Busch is going to play a big role in helping Rich Schultz Racing this year. He's looked confident, almost won the 500, and was fast at the Clash. I really think this is going to be a great year for Kyle Busch, and I think he's going to win quite a few races this year. I'm just going to say that. But transitioning back over to this, you know, Kyle Busch had a great run at Joe Gibbs Racing. He won almost 60 races at the team. He won a lot of races, won one Xfinity Series championship with the team, and really built Toyota's program up in general. But now he's over at Chevy, and he's helping Chevy's development program instead of helping, you know, the Toyota development program. And I just thought that was so interesting to me that he says that Joe Gibbs was putting up his own personal money to try to keep Kyle Busch around. And like I said, I do believe him. I really think Joe Gibbs wanted to, at least in the beginning, I really think he wanted to keep Kyle Busch around. But when Mark Truex Jr., I think a lot of things kind of changed. Two big things I think really changed this whole thing. Number one, I think Mark Truex Jr. announced he was going to return because, remember, last year at the time, we were talking about this a lot, but Mark Truex Jr. had said that he may retire at the end of 2022. I think Mark Truex Jr. coming back and the Oracle deal falling through played a role in this situation happening. So I think Mark Truex Jr. did have a big role and a big factor in why some of this stuff happened. That being said, though, it's just interesting to me that this is the narrative may have just changed a little bit. And I think some people are going to think the narrative changed a lot. I still think that regardless, Kyle Busch was asking for a lot of money. I think what we heard was like in the $10 millions. And I just think Kyle Busch also wanted a breath of fresh air. He wasn't being listened to, and by the time the year ended anyways, he was already ready to get out. You could tell his performance wasn't as good. He wasn't performing as good, and once all negotiations and all that put a tear on him, his performance dipped. I think now this year with him having a new clean slate and a new fresh way, I really think this is going to be a great year for Kyle Busch, and he's already looked good. He came close to winning the Daytona 500, almost won it, and he had a really awesome and a really good shot to win the Daytona 500. But I just found that comment very interesting during Daytona pre-race, and I think a lot of people are going to talk about it for sure, that Joe Gibbs still tried to keep Kyle Busch. It was very interesting, and very interesting the fact that we still have a little bit of indication that he's trying to keep Kyle Busch, which is very interesting. It kind of may have changed the narrative just a little bit potentially, and it might have changed the narrative for Kyle Busch because a lot of people think that Kyle Busch was getting screwed over and Joe Gibbs didn't want him because Kyle Busch had sponsors, but a lot of them, of course, are RCR sponsors because a big thing that played a role was the sponsorship and funding. But I don't know what exactly is the truth. We're not going to officially find the truth. We're going to have the Kyle Busch side, we're going to have the Joe Gibbs side, and we're going to have the official truth. There's 3 sides to every story, and Kyle Busch told his side. I wonder if Joe Gibbs will come back and say his side in the future. We know that David Wilson had a side in the situation. Kind of got taken out of context just a little bit, but in all seriousness and all honesty, that is what happened with the negotiations according to Kyle Busch. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about Kurt Busch. Now, we talked about Kurt Busch a couple weeks ago on updates on a potential return. Kurt Busch obviously is not running full-time this year, and Tyler Reddick is driving a 45 car. But Kurt Busch never confirmed that he would be officially retiring altogether. Kurt Busch says that he really wants to make a return to NASCAR. Now, he spoke to the media, of course, because, of course, he was a Grand Marshal for the Daytona 500 this year. And Kurt Busch said this. He says he believes he'll make a full recovery soon from his concussion, but is still struggling with workouts that simulate the final steps in actual race again. And he says his normal day-to-day life has been really, really good. He's been doing a really good job running the 2311 racing camp and being part of that 2311 racing group. Sounds like he may eventually, you never know, become a higher up at that team. Has been really working to coach the drivers at 2311 Racing, the main guys, that being Bubba Walls and Tyler Reddick. Now, talking about this last step, though, he's really going through the final stages, and it sounds like the doctors in him believe that he will make a full recovery soon. So it sounds like, pending how much longer the concussion stuff takes, we may not be too far from having a Kurt Busch return. Now, if Kurt Busch, of course, does decide to return in the future, which he does want to return, what tracks could he run? Well, it won't be early in the season because I still think it's going to be, despite the fact that he's getting in those later stages of it, he's been out of a car now for almost a year. It's been like, what, 6 or 7 months. The last time Kurt Busch made a start in the NASCAR Cup Series was, of course, before Pocono. New Hampshire was actually the last race where he, respectfully, I think, finished in the top 10, which was really, really good. Ran up front a lot of that race. 2311 showed a really good pace and really good speed. He was up front and ran really, really good. But going back to this, Kurt Busch, he's got to make a full recovery before he gets back in the car. And he wants to make sure his health and safety is the number one priority, which makes a lot of sense. But I think that Kurt Busch could come back on a track like maybe New Hampshire. It would have to be a lower pace track. Can't be one of those higher speed tracks. So maybe Watkins Glen, he wants to race there. Maybe Darlington could be a pretty big possibility for him. Anything's possible there. We could see Kurt Busch come back in any given track. We'll have to just wait and see there. But I really hope that Kurt Busch does make that full recovery. It sounds like he's getting closer, and every day it seems like he's getting closer and closer and closer to return. And hopefully in the future, we could see Kurt Busch make a return. But as of now, I don't know how much longer he's going to be out. It's just one thing to watch. But going to the other side of things, I really hope Kurt Busch maybe becomes part of the ownership group of 2311 Racing. I think that'd be really good for the team. Kurt Busch has got that Monster Energy backing, and if he's part of that team and the higher up of that organization, that would be really cool because he's really helped build this team up and is really building the program up. I think that'd be really cool if he got part of that ownership group of that team. But the other thing is, I want to see Kurt Busch on the Fox Sports booth. Already kind of talked about it a little bit, But Kurt Busch being part of the Fox Sports booth, I think would bring a lot of light. He's done really good with his truck broadcasts in the past. I think he's done some Xfinity Series broadcasts as well, and I think he's a really good broadcaster, and I would love for him to be in the Fox Sports booth for a few Cup races. But like I mentioned and said, if he'll run to number 6-7, if he does decide to return, I would love for him to come back and maybe win. I don't think he'll ever be as competitive. Maybe I'll be wrong and he ends up being super, super competitive when he does officially decide to return. But to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know how long it'll be till he returns. We don't know with how health and all that kind of stuff and the safety and stuff is with the safety's car especially. And Kurt Busch's concussion has really played a role in NASCAR trying to fix the safety. Now, obviously, we've seen some of the wrecks, and it sounds like from what we hear, the wrecks were not as bad this time. Well, they were bad at Daytona, but we didn't have any concussion issues, at least as of now. Now, it's only been a day, so things can change really quickly, and we could have some concussion issues that do come into play and do come to light. But as of now, I don't think those are issues. But going back to Kurt Busch, I really want to see Kurt Busch come back and run a few more races. I'm missing Kurt Busch behind the wheel, and I hope in the future, he does in the near future, decide to make a return. But going back and talking about this and stuff as well, Kurt Busch is going to have a legendary legacy. Kurt Busch won a lot of races. He won the Daytona 500. He's won the Coke 600. He won 34, 35 Cup Series races. One with every team he's been able to accomplish with, and has had a lot of success in this sport. I really hope Kurt Busch does make a return in the future because I hope he can go out and win one more race, but I'll be honest, I don't know if he'll ever make a return. That being said, though, he's one of the most underrated, one of the greatest drivers ever to race in this sport, and I hope he does make a return. But like I said, to be honest with you, I don't know if we're ever going to see Kurt Busch make a return. It sounds like he's getting closer. He hopes to return soon, but we'll have to wait and see if he does decide to return in the future because, let's be for real and honest, I think a lot of fans do want to see Kurt Busch make that return, and hopefully Kurt Busch actually can make a return to the team in the foreseeable future, to be honest with you. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Notifications on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. What are thoughts about Kurt Busch hoping to make a return soon? Let me know in the comments below. And what are thoughts about those interesting comments around Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs trying to keep Kyle Busch? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have race picks on the channel for the Auto Club weekend. There might be another video on the channel tomorrow. We're just going to have to wait and see. Wednesday is going to be a NASCAR news video. Thursday will probably be a paint scheme video looking at all the paint schemes that have been revealed and maybe a couple other videos on the channel as well. I might do race picks for Xfinity. I'm not entirely sure yet. We're just going to have to wait and see. Friday is going to be a NASCAR news video on the channel, and Saturday and Sunday we'll have videos on the channel as well. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.